Hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to this webinar hosted by Fintrail, ThetaRay and Travelex on how to move beyond a rules-based approach and supercharge your AML program with AI. My name is Maya Brain. I'm a managing director at Fintrail, which is a global financial crime consultancy. And we work with a broad range of financial institutions to build, strengthen, and assure every part of their financial crime program, including the adoption of new tools and systems, such as a shift to AI. I am delighted to be joined today by Peter and Daryl of ThetaRay and Travelex, respectively. I will hand over to each of them for a brief word of introduction. Peter, would you like to start?
Yes, hi. Thank you very much, Fintrail. Thank you very much, Daryl. Wonderful to be on this webinar today. And I think as we were starting, we saw hundreds of people joining. So, of course, welcome to them. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Peter Reynolds. I'm the CEO of ThetaRay. We are an extremely fast-growing AI-based AML company. We recently closed a $57 million funding round led by Portage, and also joined by our existing investors, JVP and others, which is fantastic for us. We established a new category called Trusted Global Payments, and we are very busy implementing that around the world. And Travelex is a fantastic customer of ours. And I actually met Daryl when I was the Chief Revenue Officer of ThetaRay. And as we were starting to work with Brazil and his group, and we love working with Travelex. And I will come back to you later on and give you more on that. But maybe over to Daryl.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Maya. I'm Daryl Norman. I'm the Chief Compliance and Risk Officer for Travelex. Some of you will probably know a bit about Travelex. So we're probably best known for our retail offering within airports. That's probably what we're most famous for. That is a big part of the business. So we serve, the FX requirements of our customers in airports. We offer obviously cash conversion, also cards and remittance in certain countries as well. We also do outsourcing, so we provide services to banks and other MSBs, both from a sort of white label perspective, but we're also a wholesaler of cash as well. So there's a number of different elements to our business, but probably as you best known for our retail offering. We are in 20 countries, so we have operations in 20 different countries, which is quite a challenge from a regulatory perspective in terms of keeping upwards of 40 to 50 financial intelligence units and regulators happy with what we're doing. So I've been with the group quite a long time, 12 years now, and we've had our sort of ups and downs across Travelex. We've documented, but we're now in a position of sort of growth and looking to the future, which is why we have partnered with ThetaRay to meet our AML requirements, which is pretty much the fundamental part of us maintaining our licenses. So that's probably a quick introduction, Maya.
Brilliant. Yep.
And Daryl, one of the fantastic things in my life is traveling around the world, meeting customers and partners. And I always note the Travelex stalls at the airports. And nice to see, by the way, Heathrow very busy. I was in Amsterdam the other day, by the way, and Schiphol Airport has a very cool Travelex kind of branded machines. I thought it was very good. And it's really important to us, that journey you're on. And we'll get into the detail, but our business is all about moving that from, into AI and creating, as we call these, trusted global payments, which is just so imperative and important to your business. And it's helping customers detect financial crime, reducing false positives, reducing that investigation time when there is anything that you want to look at, and obviously de-risking, and then making sure globally people comply. And I definitely think the way Travelex have to keep so many global regulators happy is something that is of great interest to us as a team and us as a partnership. Anyway, back to you.
Certainly a super challenging proposition if you can make it work across that many different jurisdictions and regulators, and for that complex business model, then you obviously do need the most advanced tooling and systems to be able to make that work. Cool. So let's dive in. I'll just say that if anyone has any questions or would like to get involved, please do use the chat function at the side. We would like this to be interactive and have audience members join the discussion. And we'll try and answer the questions probably as we go through. So I'll just quickly set the scene. I guess it is a huge cliche in many ways to say that AI is clearly a hot topic. Everyone is talking about it. It's had a ton of media coverage and is very much in the public consciousness, particularly since the launch of ChatGPT at the end of last year. But actually, it's been a topic of development within financial crime for a while now. So it's not a new idea, and it probably isn't accurate to think of it as the future of financial crime or something off on the horizon. Firms are working with AI tools now. It's essentially tried and tested by numerous different types of financial institutions, especially with regard to transaction monitoring, which is what we're probably going to talk more about today. And with transaction monitoring in particular, it's been clear for years that the old methods are not working. So rules-based transaction monitoring generates false positive rates of, I mean, we've all seen the stats, somewhere between 95, 98, pick your figure, % are false positives. And you consider in what other setting you would accept a 5% success rate, like that clearly isn't good enough. And criminals are obviously increasingly sophisticated and good at leveraging this new technology. There's been lots of media articles about malicious alternatives to ChatGPT and ones designed specifically for criminal activity and fraud. So if criminals are taking advantage of this new technology, it's really clear that financial crime compliance professionals need to be doing the same. Peter, perhaps you could start by setting the scene in terms of what are the main differences between a rules-based system and an AI system for transaction monitoring? How do the AI systems work, and what is it that potentially makes them so powerful?
Sure, and I think your setting of the scene was great. I think AI is not new. I think AI has become a buzzword, and lots of people now talk about AI. But actually, I think where we've moved on to is how easy is it to implement AI to get a good result? And we're talking today about detecting financial crime. It's incredibly important for businesses, for society, that it works. So it's about how do you implement it in a way that does work? And you've brought up a good point. So there's a way of detecting financial crime using rules. So building rules and say, if this happens, let's look at it. And over time, companies had these rules that became very, very convoluted. They become exceptional, complex, because there's so many of them. They're hard to manage, they're hard to update. Criminals know them. We all know that, if I was going to send some money, I might keep it at a lower level. I might do it from a certain jurisdiction, knowing that there were rules. They're pretty easy to know. And the output, of course, is that by having all those rules, you get lots of noise. And by lots of noise, we talk about in the industry false positives. That is when something is alerted and says, hey, this could be bad, which leads to an investigation, but it wasn't bad. Now, that's the output of that is cost, because you need lots of people to manage alerts. But actually, far more important is customer experience. So why does it take us so long and cost so money to transfer money? And that's because if there's 95% false positive alerts, then there's lots of people looking at alerts rather than allowing money to straight through process. And while we want barriers to stop the bad, the good transactions, those good payments around the world, we want them to straight through process. Now, I'm sure Daryl will have an opinion, because in Daryl's business, add a complexity that it's a real-time transaction at an airport where someone doesn't have 5 hours to see if his payments get through, or 3 days. It might be 3 minutes while he's deciding to get some currency for a holiday. So this is where, when we started working with Travelex, the fun and the challenge for the teams is that imagine having to do that in a real-time decisioning process. So using AI, find out if something's good and allow it to happen in minutes, rather than, the old banking way that might take, 3 days and a couple of people checking and what have you.
I think that's really true. And it's sort of the added complexity I hadn't thought of, which is, we think of digital payments have to be super fast and done immediately. But at least if you're doing something on a phone, you're possibly sitting at home with a cup of tea. And if it takes any significant amount of time, you're going to abandon the transaction. But there's that added pressure if someone is physically standing in front of you and you have only got their attention for that tiny period of time. It makes it particularly challenging. Daryl, can you tell us something about the Travelex story? So what were the reasons which made it clear that you wanted to look at introducing a new tool, considering adopting AI? how how you've started introducing it.
Yeah, so we had a very specific use case that we needed to address in Brazil. So we were sort of entered offering a new sort of products offering to a particular set of customers around mass payments. So we were basically providing the sort of payment services to payments aggregators, which meant that we were having to screen exponentially more transactions than we'd ever had to do before, because the payments were sort of aggregated when we were providing the payment service on behalf of that payments aggregator. So we had a responsibility under Brazilian regulations to do all of that screening of those individual transactions as well. So the volume of what we were pumping through the process was just suddenly massively increased, and it became very, very clear that the current tools we had in place were not fit for purpose to really cope with the volume and the complexity, and really pick up the nuances of anything suspicious within those payments. So it is a very specific use case in Brazil. One of our sort of senior team out there had used ThetaRay previously in a bank that she used to work for, and the team got in contact and started to start the process to see whether ThetaRay could meet requirements. And I think that was not at that point. I wasn't involved. The Brazil business is relatively separate from the rest of the group in some ways. That was down to them to sort of really determine what they were going to use. I am a director of a Brazil business, so I do have an interest in making sure that the rules and regulations are actually complied with. But the first time I really got more involved in the process is when I was over in Sao Paulo last July and met Peter for the first time when he had a demo on ThetaRay as they were sort of starting the implementation process. And then I sort of got the idea in my mind that actually this could be very useful across the rest of Travelex as well. So we have a very specific use case for Brazil, but actually, utilizing this technology in a way which we can then configure to address the specific risks that we have across Travelex is, something that our current system just doesn't do. We also had other imperatives of moving off the current AML system which we were on, because it was coming end of support. It was incredibly expensive to manage as well. So anyway, Peter and I got talking, as you do, and we were looking at some other providers anyway. We were looking at more, there's been quite a lot of innovation in the AML market over the last number of years with some new entrants who can provide a lot better service than the situation when we implemented our current system, which is about sort of 6 or 7 years ago. So the whole approach to AML has massively improved and innovated around the utilization of technology. So when we were looking at different providers, we had to sort of decide what we wanted to achieve, what we were trying to achieve as part of this. And we look at financial crime very much from a product lens. This is something our new CEO has very much brought in. So financial crime impacts the customer journey at every single point, really. So the example you use when you're standing in front of the bureau, you're doing a sanction check on a customer, you've got to try and make that as frictionless as possible. So you don't want loads of false positives, because that customer's got to wait there until you clear the alert. And in the vast majority of cases, you do clear the alert, because so you've got to bring intelligence into the process. You've got to try and identify the friction points that you've got within the end-to-end customer journey, which we can influence from a financial crime perspective and try and optimize that. And it became very, very clear that the technology that ThetaRay could offer us was also going to be very useful to the rest of the group. On top of that, we also had the assurance that the deployment in Brazil had actually gone extremely well. So, you get into bed with a partner like this, and it all looks good and the technology looks good, but actually when you go down to implementing it, it can be an absolute nightmare, and things just don't work. That wasn't the case, because the teams work so well together, and I think the understanding of the technology was good, and they deployed in record time in Brazil. So we had a tried and trusted tool, which I thought could actually be very useful to the rest of the group. We were looking at other options as well, but they were rules based. We weren't really going to get the uptick in performance and efficiency that we really needed. We've got a lot of false positives across the group. The tool we've got is quite blunt. The only way you can really deal with that is by chucking resources at it, and that brings in its own problems. The world is becoming more and more complex in terms of what you need to look for. Regulators are becoming more and more prescriptive in terms of what you need to look for, and placing more focus and responsibility on the organization to do that. And the more people you check at it, the more opportunity there is for human error. So having the ability to utilize technology to deal with the volumes that we're now having to process through our AML systems is the only way to do this. And without embracing some of these new methods and AI, I know it's very much it's a buzzword, but I don't really see it like that. I just see it as another facet of technology development. I'm not a computer scientist, but you've got to embrace technology to address what is a specific challenge that we have across our business, and I think is shared by most organizations playing in this space. So it just seemed like the right thing for us to do, and it came at the right time as well. So coupled with the very effective use case we had in Brazil, which was deployed well and is working well, we decided to take the leap of faith and start to implement it across the rest of the group. We're not there yet. We're right in the middle of doing it as we speak. I've just come off a call with Peter's team about where we are in the project, and there's challenges there that we're facing into, which will undoubtedly resolve. But it's something we've just got to do, because you can't just chuck more and more resources at this.
I think, it's a really good point. And I think this is a really good example, actually, but starting with a specific use case and in a specific jurisdiction, because it's one thing that can make it seem very daunting, is sort of ripping up your entire transaction monitoring process and changing to something very new. But actually, most of the time, that isn't how firms that have adopted AI have done it. They've sort of either introduced it maybe in parallel with an existing system for a while, so they have that comfort as to how it's working, or it's for a specific use case, or something supplementary so they can see how it's working. And it generally isn't the case that firms just go gung-ho and adopt it for everything. There are more gradual ways to do it. So if you are facing internal opposition within a firm, or if you yourself feel you want to really understand how this works, it doesn't need to be a all in right from the beginning kind of approach. And I think you're really right saying that AI isn't this big scary. It's not. It is a technological development, and those happen all the time. And a lot of firms might actually be using AI for some of their tooling without necessarily realizing it, particularly if they use third-party tools. If they're doing adverse media screening, for instance, most of those larger providers use an element of natural language processing to work out which media results are relevant or not. So if what you're seeing is the outcomes, you might not realize what's going on in the back end, and that there are components of AI already working within some of your tools. So I definitely think it needn't be this big, scary undertaking, which, I think the Travelex example showcases really well.
I do think, though, that you've got to take your. I mean, we've got quite a big compliance and risk team. We've got over 200 people in scattered across different countries. You've got to take them on that journey, though, because they are used to a rules-based approach, and to a certain extent, it's their comfort blanket.
Yeah.
So if you can implement a new system, get them comfortable with how to use it with rules, then the AI comes as a nice. I mean, I'm sure Peter would sort of market the ThetaRay tool like this, but AI does come as a very nice add-on that you can then start to develop. And once your MLROs who are ultimately accountable for for making sure that the processing is done accurately and correctly, but once you can get them comfortable with how to use a tool, then you can add in that additional functionality and you can take them on that journey. So getting the hearts and minds of people who are very quite set in their ways of doing something in a very specific way, and have done it for years, is very much part of that journey. And we did find that in Brazil. There was certain some of our analysts took to it easier than others, and some of it just still don't get it, quite frankly. But it's a case of this is the way the world is going, and if you're going to develop your capability within this space, and you develop your own capability as an analyst or as a senior compliance person, you've got to start to grasp this technology and understand how it works. So it is definitely part of the journey.
Yeah, I think that's true. And that's the same with any change, I guess, isn't it? That if you've moved from the days of doing like manual screening, for instance, and comparing names to a list, like even just automating that would have felt like a big step to start with. But yeah, definitely there are a lot of stakeholders involved who you will need to take on the journey.
Yeah, I think also there's like a sometimes things in this industry can seem too good to be true, and especially when you're working with people in compliance. And I think, Daryl, as an industry, when people come to you and say, hey, AI is going to solve everything, like trust us, and it'll be deployed in 2 weeks. It's like, guys, this is a complex thing. Like, what did Daryl just say? They've got regulators around the world who are going to be looking at what they're doing, testing what they're doing, making sure they're okay with what they're doing. The regulator in Brazil, who we were with your team, Daryl, there recently, and the regulator in another country might have a different opinion on how you do something. And, you do an implementation, and Daryl talks about the challenges of the global implementation being around like the mindset shift of saying, hey, you used to get 500 alerts, and in that you would find 10 bits of financial crime. Now you're going to get 3 alerts, and we think 2 of them will have financial crime. That's a mindset shift, because what I was used to doing is looking at lots of noise and finding things in it. I was doing something. I was being proactive. Now what you're saying is that what AI will do is it will get rid of all the things that are good, and it will just find you the things that we think you should look at. And there's a KPI we look at, which is very important, which is the detection worthiness. So was this alert something the compliance team wanted to see? Whether it was a financial crime or not, it was worth us looking at. And that's a mindset shift that is a cultural change. And I think it's very, very important. And as Daryl said, we did a very fast, good implementation in Brazil, and then people started using it. But that doesn't mean someone in Dubai is going to say, this is going to work for me. So you have to go on that journey again with each country. And Travelex is unique that there's 20 countries with 20 different cultures and 20 different sets of people. And regulators around the world are used to doing different things. It's funny. When I became the CEO of ThetaRay, people said to me, you're going to spend all your time with regulators talking about regulation. And I said, no, I'm not, because I'm going to focus on growing the business and spending time with customers. And now I spend all my time with regulators around the world, because it's just such an important thing, because regulators are pushing to adopt AI. Like if there's not a regulator in the world who's not looking at how AI can improve processes. Actually, ThetaRay is lucky enough to be used by some of the regulators in how they look at the bank's transactions to find financial crime. But with that becomes, okay, it needs to be explainable. We need to understand how the model is going to work. What do you mean you're going to straight through process this 4,000 payments and only stop these 3? Like, it's not just Daryl we need to convince and Daryl's MRLOs, it's the regulator to make sure that they're happy. So it's the move's happening. I don't think there's a debate anymore. Should we use rules? Should we use AI? The debate now is how easily can we use AI so that it can be implemented quickly. Daryl didn't want us to come and say, listen, just give us a year or 2 and we'll learn from your data and come with some insights. Daryl said, let's go live tomorrow. Like, this is the world they live in. They need to go do things quickly. And I think what you're finding the battleground is now is how can you implement it quickly and efficiently, cost effectively, on the cloud, so that Daryl doesn't have to have 20 data centers around the world. That's not what he wants to do. And in a way that his users, his regulators can understand, but ultimately so that there's a customer benefit. Daryl, I recently landed in Dubai, and it was amazing. There was like a mobile Travelex desk where a gentleman came to me and sold me a service, which is the money transfer, pretty much while I was walking, and I changed into some dirhams. And it amazed me, like in that 2-minute conversation, he also had to make sure that the compliance checks were done and that I was someone that we should work with. It's very interesting that when you take everything we're talking about it and then move it into that real-time interaction where a decision has to be made or business lost, which ultimately that's what, Daryl's job is turning, compliance into a yes rather than a no, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We've got to make that sort of customer, I think I said it earlier, that customer interaction has got to be positive for a number of reasons. So, we're there in these airports, but we're there representing the customer of the airport as well as the customer itself. So we've got to make that process as efficient and slick as we possibly can, whilst also making sure we meet the requirements of the regulators whose country we are in. So there's a number of different stakeholders to sort of manage from that perspective, but we've got to really be focused on the customer and doing what we need to do, but doing it as in an efficient way as we possibly can. And there's still a lot of scope to improve that process. Banks have it a little bit easier, but even the banks which have differentiated themselves in this space and making the onboarding using the financial crime processes in a slick and focusing on the UX for the customer, and that's what's going to make the differentiator, I think, from a business perspective. And when we talk to new airports we want to go into, or maybe new countries that we want to go into, which is still very much on our agenda, we still want to expand the business, then this is a massive talking point, because we've got to demonstrate to them that we can come into their country, we can meet the requirements of their culture and their rules and their regulations, but also serve customers and provide that service for there also. So it's fundamentally important to the commercial prosperity of the brand, of the business, as well as just meeting regulations.
Which is really interesting, particularly for a compliance story, and that often compliance is obviously seen as a cost center and it's something that blocks business. But I think this is a really, really clear case of where good compliance actually enables business growth, and it enables you to do things that you couldn't have done before. So you talked before, Daryl, about the new product, mass payments in Brazil, which, compliance might have been a blocker previously. It's like you can't expand into that if you don't have the resources to process all that the volumes that you'll have to do. But if you have the right tooling, then it can enable growth. You can move into new markets, you can have those new products, because you don't have to massively expand the compliance team and the people that you have, because the technology is much, much more scalable. So it really is a growth enabler for once.
And I think the scalability of the technology, as you said, is so key. So again, a fundamental strategic shift we've made by moving to ThetaRay, or we will do when we get it deployed across the rest of the group, as software as a service. So we used to host our AML systems, albeit on the cloud, but we paid a big license fee up front. That's CapEx. The whole dynamics of how you consume AML technology is changing for us. So software as a service gives us that variability of a cost base. So we can pay per transaction. We pay ThetaRay per transaction, which is the right way to look at it. It's part of the process. It's part of the business process that you're providing. So to have this massive fixed cost base, which is where we were with the incumbent systems, and then having to pay a maintenance support contracts on top of that, having to make sure the infrastructure it's sat on was up to date and patched, and all of these elements which our IT team had to do, that goes away. So we've now got a partner, and we do see ThetaRay as a partner. We've got a partner who are experts in this. They're experts in the technology, they're experts in the data science, they're experts in the artificial intelligence deployment. We can work with them to do all of that stuff which we were having to do internally through our IT team, and we can focus then, and the whole dynamics of how the technology team then develops is we can focus on what we're good at within technology, which is FX systems. We're not there to be experts on AML systems or finance systems, and we're doing the same with our finance systems as well. So software as a service, how you can utilize that can change the entire dynamics of how the business actually operates as well. And our CTO has been talking about that as quite publicly around how that is changing. And we're one of the biggest consumers of technology in Travelex, West really as in finance. We're the two big users. So and it costs a lot of money.
That per transaction cost, Darryl, is why I spend my life happy at airports when I see queues at the Travelex booth.
Yeah, well, we don't want those. We want to be processing those queues quickly, Peter. So
I think that's very true, by the way. Like, I think this thing that was holding AI back was honestly cloud computing hadn't caught up quick enough. We'd ThetaRay worked with a couple of cloud partners, and about 2 years ago when I joined, we moved to Azure, Microsoft. And firstly, it makes sense because Darryl's right. We mass buy. We now have approaching 100 customers, millions and millions and trillions of dollars of transactions going over our system. So we pay for the cloud and bake that into the per transaction cost. So not only do we come out with all of the coolest, latest and greatest things on Azure and OpenAI and the partnership with Microsoft, it's like it's not Darryl or Travelex's issue. Like, they honestly, from a compliance person, over the world, I know quite a few of them. But if you go back to that Brazil example, the Brazil team want to get in, they want to process compliance, they want to act as what they are, which is a regulated entity and a bank actually in Brazil, and do their job and make sure there's no financial crime. What they don't want to do is be in meetings about upgrades or more server capacity. Like, that's part of the service that you're paying for. And I think it enables then financial crime people to work on financial crime and not IT. We all talk about regulators, right? And I know it's very, very respectful of how important it is for a global company like Travelex to keep the regulator happy, and they do a very good job at it. However, that's not the job. The job is to find financial crime. And financial crime isn't a victimless thing, right? It's an important thing. So, we're very keen that we take the headache away of technology, of modeling, of how you do your AI, so that Darryl and his team can do what they do, which is run a very successful business that allows millions of people to travel around the world with their access to cash and the ability to enjoy their work or travel or whatever it might be, while his team can make sure that they are stopping the bad actors using that service for what is not victimless. So I think that's really important to us, that there's reason behind what we're doing here. It's not just an implementation of AI for the sake of an implementation of AI,
I think it's a really good point, in that we've come across this as a potential blocker with some fans we've talked to who've raised the point. They're like, one, they say their data isn't good enough yet, but whose data is ever, who does have good data? But also that they don't have the expertise internally. Like, we don't have the data scientists, we don't have the expertise, we wouldn't be able to move to something complex like this. And this is sort of the whole point. It's like, you don't need to. That's the whole point. You don't need to have an internal team of data scientists, because you're leveraging what is essentially a partnership with a firm that provides that for you. So as you say, Peter, you can then focus on financial crime. Tell us what you need the outputs of this to be, how this is going to give you the best value for your program, but how you make that work, like, leave that to us. Yeah. Potentially following on from the data point, actually, I was going to ask Darryl, and Peter, I'm sure you have thoughts on this as well, but practical recommendations for firms looking to consider adopting AI, in terms of where you start, things like data that you might need to consider, resourcing, anything like that. Any practical thoughts for firms starting on this journey?
I think it's based on the experience in Brazil. It's as you said earlier, it's about sort of steps, baby steps, taking the initial steps to get the system understood, and then sort of targeting the use cases that you need to have. So we didn't deploy across all of the products in Brazil. We deployed first off on the specific product, but we but we were having the challenge with around mass payments. So I think, and then doing that in steps across the other products as you learn from that experience. So you've got to sort of test and learn as you move across. The more data it consumes, obviously, the more intelligent it gets. So you do at the end of this get a customizable solution, which is which is exactly what every business would want, because you're feeding your data, your outcomes into this model, and then it's looking at things in a different way. What there is a sort of danger to try and, perhaps I shouldn't say this, but to try and understand it too much, and exactly how it all works. I think you've got to be really focused on the outcome, and particularly when you talk to regulators, that's what they're focused on. They've got a set of risks that they're looking for us to manage, and we're looking to manage across our business. So you've got to look at the outcome. Sort of how you get there to a certain extent is obviously needs to be explained, which is what Peter and the team can do. But you should sort of embrace the technology, I think, rather than try and understand it to the nth degree and sort of pick holes in it. Unless, of course, you are a computer scientist and you do understand it in lots of detail, but I'm not. So you've got to embrace it, I think, and run with it, and put your trust in it as well as you move through. But you've got to do that in a sort of stepped way, so you build your confidence as you move through it. So that would be sort of my recommendation. You shouldn't go big bang on this.
Darryl, I think I'll add to that also. I think personally, I think it is a leap, right, to move to AI. And I think what I learned from specifically the Brazil Travelex and then Travelex group story is you're absolutely right. Let's start somewhere where there's a need and implement it quickly and see what we think. And I think that worked very well. And I think that led to a very deep trust and understanding against the teams. But I do think also from a learning point, what I reflected on is firstly, there is a community, right? You talked about one of your team knew us from a bank. So you get confidence because it's at a bank. And then, Darryl, you won't mind me saying this, you were very thorough in your selection. It wasn't just a sales deck you wanted to speak to references. You wanted to understand the strength of the partner. You wanted to understand more than just the shiny stuff. And I do think that one of the differences that we've brought to the table, post the people always think of the sale as the first part, but it's not, as the end. It's not. Then you start this journey. I do think having strong regulatory affairs people on both sides, so that when you go to the FIU in a certain country, you take us with you, you explain the outcome, and you have a partner that can help answer the questions and give the confidence that often a regulator needs, that all the right stuff is being done, even if we're only going to look at the outcomes. And then I also think one of the special things about the relationship here is that there is an executive relationship. And obviously we're doing a webinar and lots of companies do webinars, but what people don't know is that you and I have lunch every now and again. We talk, and not just good stuff. We say, okay, we've got this lack of data in this country. What do we think? This country might need to be on-prem. How do we think about, can you help us sell the cloud here? And I think that is one of the things that I love about ThetaRay and Travelex, is that it's a partnership that deals with how do we get to where we want to go in the quickest way possible with what we've got in front of us. And I think that's one of the big things about any relationship, is that there's executive presence, including Richard, your CEO, who I've met and has sat in demos of ThetaRay and is got a very big opinion on how ThetaRay should be deployed, which is very, very good. Yeah,
and you need that support from top down. It's not just Richard. I think our chairman Mike Rees is also, I've briefed the board obviously on what we're doing here, and we see it as a hugely important step forward for the business in terms of its capability, and that needs to be endorsed, from the board downwards, from a shareholder downwards. So we've made sure that it's got the visibility that it needs, but also that we, to a certain extent, de-risked how we're going to deploy it. And can embrace the new technology in the right way, with perhaps a little bit of luxury of having time to do it as well. So you've got to give yourself space to implement this. If you're really up against it, it can be, as we know with most technology implementations, they can be quite difficult, and there's always problems. So you've got to give yourself a decent amount of time to select, and then make sure that you've got a proper deployment.
Yeah. I think you both touched on a couple of the things that we often advise. So working out a step-by-step gradual approach rather than assuming that you're going to change everything all at once. And that point about the ongoing relationship is the other thing. Like, look for a firm that's got that good ongoing support, because this isn't a thing you buy off the shelf and then you're just left to get on with it. One of the other things, is really taking time in that selection process. Like, this is going to be a key part of your program, and not all offerings are the same. And it can take a bit more effort to get under the hood and understand what the specific tools offer and how they work, but it really is worth doing that. Which actually brings me on to, I realize in the title of this webinar, we've talked about unsupervised AI. Maybe we can touch on that without getting too technical, but it's one of the things I found really interesting talking to ThetaRay, and it answered a lot of my questions as to how AI works for transaction monitoring specifically. So Pete, without getting too technical, can you give us a brief idea of what that means using an unsupervised AI model?
Okay, yeah, I'll step away from my very technical answer that I could easily give and give one that sounds like I'm not the expert. No, look, I think it's the rules going all the way to unsupervised AI. There's lots of words in the industry, but let me explain what ThetaRay does. So I talked to you earlier about rules. So you can build lots and lots of rules that all try and work together to say if Peter's sending Mayor some money and he's done it 3 times on a Thursday before, maybe we should look at it. All these kind of convoluted rules that come up to create alerts. What ThetaRay does, actually, the way that AI works is it understands normality. So it looks at the data. It understands normality. Models that have been trained on trillions of dollars of transactions and taking different risks that Darryl and his team want to bring into it. And the normal ones, it says, okay, you're fine. It finds the ones that aren't normal. So by using unsupervised AI, it learns from the data. It says, hey, you should probably have a look at these. And then it tests constantly to make sure that the ones it is showing were, and I go back to that point, detection worthy. We were looking at the right thing. And that's the name, sometimes unsupervised, isn't necessarily a regulator-friendly term. Unsupervised means that you're just letting it work. There's a lot of control and governance and supervision around the unsupervised AI. Like, Darryl's team, if I think about one of the main things Darryl and his team do is make sure everything they're doing is in a governance process with the right checks and balances. The way we're finding, the way the data is being trained is unsupervised. So as Darryl said, we're letting AI find the bad. Now, there's some huge benefits from that, by the way. One thing we haven't talked about yet is it gets rid of human bias. Like, you don't want any human bias in a decision when you're trying to make a decision based on, is it financial crime, which can happen, especially, by the way, when Darryl has to work in so many cultures, so many countries, so many different types of financial crime, and then making sure that in a compliant way, his team are okay with the results, and then they're acting on them as a human once they've got the alerts in the investigation center, which is where all of this pops up to the compliance team.
Yeah, that is a really good point. It's something that we bang on about a lot at Fintrail, but the idea of sort of bias and inbuilt, and obviously if you are training, if it's a more supervised AI model and it's learning what analysts have previously decided and then replicating that, if analysts have previously made uninformed or biased decisions, you run the risk of just replicating it. Whereas that's one of the advantages of unsupervised, is it takes a fresh look and says, this is normal, this is not normal, and it therefore doesn't replicate those inbuilt biases or blind spots, which is definitely a real upsell.
If any job you have to do over and over again at volume, a human, like I have a 13-year-old daughter. So for example, if she was going to write 100 lines, like in the old days, I will do my homework on time. Look at the amount of quality you put into the first versus the 100th, right? It's just a human doing repetitive tasks by the end doesn't do them with the same quality. So if the problem actually in the industry is if you've got 500 alerts to look at, actually the problem is the number of alerts, but also the quality of the alert investigation you will do does diminish. That's human nature. That's just the industry. If you can use AI to say, listen, as someone investigating alerts, you have 5 to look at, and here's the data behind it. Here's why we think it's an alert. You can look at those alerts better. That's one of the things. And then take a global team like a Travelex that have phenomenal teams in India and other places that are also working on level 2. So once they do think there's alerts, they need to really look at it, very with great seriousness. They know that where they're spending their time is where the model says they really should spend their time. Very important.
Yeah, so that's sort of muscle memory and psychological things to underpin this as well. But if you've looked at 100 alerts and dismissed them all as false positives, when you look at the 101st, you're already pre-programmed to say that it's a false positive. It's really hard to look at it completely fresh on its own merits, which obviously technology will do. It will treat each transaction completely separately and won't have that problem. So if the 101st, for a start, you're not generating as many alerts in the first place, but it also looks at each alert completely fresh, without repeating or falling into patterns of behavior.
Sure.
Yeah. Are there particular firms that you think would benefit more from moving to AI transaction monitoring, or are there ways that it can work for? I'm thinking particularly of like smaller startups that maybe don't have a lot of historical data. Does it work sort of across the spectrum from there up to larger banks or multinationals like Travelex?
It's a very good question, and it's a very good question, and I get a perspective. So we work with some of the largest banks in the world, Santander globally, and we have fintechs, tiny fintechs, 5-10 person operations that might be sending money, I don't know, from Nigeria to the UK, and you can deploy AI very quickly in that space, especially if you have a good use case. So if you're a remittance company or a processor and the provider you're looking at has already built those models, then you can deploy them very, very quickly. You do need data, but you don't need too much data. Like our view on data is you need enough data to look at the transactions you're looking at, but you don't need years and years and years of data. Actually, with Travelex, what was very interesting is they have a very strong IT team. Daryl says, they're not an ITT company, but the people they have are good and they can get lots of data. And what we found in that process is that you don't need data that goes back too long. You just need to make sure that the data you've got on your transactions, which all payment fintechs or banks are going to have. Sorry, I thought Daryl might have dropped there for a minute. The screen flickered.
It did. I'm afraid. The joys of the internet.
Yeah.
Don't get away that easily. Cool. Well, I think we are pretty much up to time. So there's been some really interesting points that have come out of that. Thank you both so much for that. And thank you, Daryl, for joining us. I think it's super helpful to hear from an actual practitioner and hear how this has actually worked with a real life case study. I think it's really super helpful. And thank you, Peter, as well, for all of your insights and for sharing the experiences of the work that you have done at ThetaRay. And thank you to everyone for attending. Hopefully we have answered any questions you have and addressed all of the things you would like to know about. But if not, we'll share our contact details. You can get in touch with us afterwards, and we're very happy to answer any questions, or if you would like a further follow-up discussion, we'd be very happy to do that too. And we will also be putting out a white paper on this topic soon, so co-authored by ThetaRay and Fintrail. So we will circulate that along with the link to the recording of this session to everyone that's registered. So I hope that everyone has found this useful and is going away with something to think about. Thank you all very much. Goodbye.